The Twilight Archive floated in the darkness, a massive station circling a star that had maybe 1,000,000 years left to live. Inside its great hall, representatives from 47 different species sat in silence. They had gathered for what they called the acceptance ceremony, a tradition that had grown more common with each passing century. The universe was dying. Everyone knew it. The scientists had confirmed it thousands of years ago, and every generation since had watched the evidence grow stronger. Stars burned out faster than new ones formed. Galaxies drifted apart, pushed by forces no one could stop. The darkness between worlds grew wider and colder with each passing year. Eventually, in some distant future, everything would simply end. The Verithi had been the first to accept this truth. They were an ancient species, tall and thin with skin that shimmered like oil on water. They had lived for millions of years and had seen more of the universe than any other race. When their scientists proved that extinction was inevitable, the Verithi made a choice. They built beautiful memorial worlds filled with art and music and memories. Then they simply stopped having children. Within a few generations, they would be gone, peacefully and with purpose. The Kraloth had been warriors. Their empire had covered 300 star systems, and their soldiers had never known defeat. But when they learned the universe itself was the enemy, they understood they could not win this fight. They laid down their weapons and turned to meditation. Their greatest generals became monks. Their war fleets became temples. They too had chosen to fade away with grace. One by one, other species had come to the same conclusion. The Council kept records of every civilization that had accepted their fate. The number was now 2,847. Some went quietly. Others through great festivals that lasted decades, celebrations of life before the final goodbye. But all of them accepted that fighting the death of the universe was pointless. Then the humans arrived. Ambassador Chen Wei walked into the great hall with a confidence that seemed strange for such a young species. Humans had only been traveling between stars for a few hundred years. They had barely explored their own small corner of the galaxy. Yet here she stood before the council, representing her people at the acceptance ceremony. The eldest Verithi, a being who called himself Solemnity and Starlight, spoke first. His voice was soft and kind. "We welcome humanity to this gathering. We know that accepting the end is difficult, especially for younger races. But we have found that there is peace in acceptance. Tell us, have your people come to make their peace with what must be?" Chen Wei looked around the hall at all the assembled species. Some of them had been ancient when humanity was still learning to make fire. Others had mastered technologies that humans could barely understand. But they all shared the same tired acceptance in their eyes. "No," Chen Wei said simply. "We haven't come to accept anything. We've come to tell you that we're not done yet." A murmur ran through the hall. Several of the assembled representatives looked at each other in confusion. The Kraloth ambassador, a massive creature covered in thick armor plates, leaned forward. "Young human, we understand your reluctance. But the mathematics are clear. The physics cannot be changed. The universe will end." Chen Wei nodded. "Maybe it will, but that doesn't mean we have to end with it." She activated a holographic display that floated above the center of the hall. Numbers and diagrams filled the air, showing calculations and theories that made several of the older species sit up straighter in surprise. "We've been working on this since we learned about the heat death," Chen Wei explained. "We found 17 different approaches that might extend the lifespan of stars. We've discovered methods to harvest energy from sources you've deemed too dangerous or difficult. We've even begun theoretical work on creating new universes in laboratory conditions." Solemnity and Starlight made a sound that might have been a sigh. "Child, we explored all of these paths millions of years ago. They are dead ends. You will waste countless lives and resources chasing the impossible. Maybe, Chanwei said again, but at least we'll waste them trying. Every species in this room chose to die with dignity. That's your choice, and we respect it. But humans choose to live without dignity if that's what it takes. We choose to fight even if we know we'll lose. Because the alternative is giving up, and we don't know how to do that. The hall erupted in debate. Some species found the human perspective refreshing, even admirable. Others thought it was dangerous foolishness. The Kraloth argued that such stubborn refusal would only lead to suffering. The younger races wondered if humanity might be onto something, but Solemnity and Starlight remained quiet, watching Chen Wei with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Finally, he spoke again. Your species does not understand what you are choosing. We have seen races refuse to accept the end before. They always came to regret it. The suffering they endured in their final years was far worse than if they had simply accepted peace. We do not wish this fate for humanity. Chen Wei met his gaze without flinching. With respect, that's our choice to make. We didn't come here for permission. We came here as a courtesy to let you know what we're doing, and to make an offer. If any of you change your minds, if any of you decide you'd rather go down fighting than fade away quietly, you're welcome to join us. That is a dangerous offer, another Verthi said sharply. You would undo millions of years of careful acceptance. You would fill dying species with false hope. Maybe it's false, Chan Wei admitted, but it's still hope. And we'd rather have false hope than true despair. She deactivated the holographic display and bowed to the council. We thank you for your time. We understand if you think we're fools. But humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and disasters that should have ended us a dozen times over. We've never accepted extinction before, and we're not starting now. The human delegation began to leave the hall. Behind them, the assembled species continued to argue among themselves. Some called the humans inspirational. Others called them insane. But as the last human ship departed from the Twilight Archive, heading toward the darkest and most dangerous regions of space, every species in that hall felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time. They felt uncertain. And for civilizations that had made peace with death, uncertainty was the most dangerous feeling of all. 50 years passed, and the galaxy couldn't ignore humanity anymore. The Verthi monitoring stations picked up the signals first. Massive energy readings coming from human space. Power outputs that shouldn't have been possible for such a young civilization. They sent scout ships to investigate, and what they found disturbed them deeply. Humans were building. Not small projects or simple colonies, but constructions on a scale that even ancient species found shocking. They called their efforts the Defiance Projects, and there were dozens of them scattered across human territory. Project Prometheus was perhaps the most ambitious. The humans had found a way to extract matter directly from black holes. They used quantum tunneling technology on a scale that most species had declared impossible. Giant machines surrounded 3 separate black holes, slowly pulling atoms through the event horizon. The process was incredibly dangerous and consumed enormous amounts of energy, but it worked. The humans were literally stealing from the universe's graves to fuel their survival. Project Atlas was equally impressive and equally desperate. Around dying stars throughout human space, enormous structures grew like metal flowers. These Dyson swarms captured every photon that the failing stars produced. Nothing was wasted. Every bit of light and heat was harvested, stored, and used. The humans had turned their home systems into vast engines designed to squeeze life from death. Then there was Project Sisyphus, which most observers agreed was complete madness. Massive generation ships, each the size of a small moon, pushed enormous spheres of compressed matter through space. They were all heading toward the same point in deep space, a location that humans had calculated with impossible precision. Their goal was to gather enough mass in one location to trigger a new Big Bang, at least on a local scale. Most scientists agreed it would never work. The humans kept pushing anyway. The council watched all of this with growing concern. They sent delegations to speak with humanity, to try to understand what was happening. What they discovered was worse than they had imagined. Humanity had abandoned almost every ethical guideline that peaceful species held dear. Entire planets had been hollowed out and converted into raw materials. Solar systems had been dismantled, their resources fed into the endless projects. Trillions of humans lived in conditions that could barely be called survival, working day and night on constructions that might never succeed. Ambassador Chen Wei, now over 100 years old and kept alive by machines that had replaced half her body, met with the council representatives. She looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "We're not proud of what we've become," she told them. "We know we've turned our civilization into a factory. We know our people suffer, but we're still here. We're still trying. That's more than we can say for your species." A Varithi delegate tried to reason with her. "Look at what you've done to yourselves. Your people live in misery. Your worlds are stripped bare. And for what? All of your projects will eventually fail. The mathematics haven't changed." Chen Wei's cybernetic eyes glowed softly in the dim light. "Maybe they will fail. Probably they will. But at least we'll fail trying. At least when the end comes, we can say we didn't just roll over and accept it." The delegates left with heavy hearts. They reported back to the council that humanity was beyond saving, that the species had driven itself to the edge of madness in pursuit of the impossible. The council prepared to classify humanity as a tragic case study in denial. But then something unexpected happened. A young Kraloth warrior named Thunder of Mountains broke his meditation. He had spent 20 years in silent contemplation, preparing his spirit for the end of all things. But he had been listening to reports about humanity, and something had stirred in his chest. Something he thought had died with his warrior days. He gathered others who felt the same way. Young Kraloth, who had never known battle, who had been raised only to accept and meditate. Together they went to human space and offered their help. They brought knowledge of materials and engineering that humanity lacked. More importantly, they brought fresh hands and minds to continue the work. Then a group of Varithi scientists made an announcement that shocked their entire civilization. They had been secretly reviewing the old research, the theories that had been abandoned millions of years ago. And while working with human physicists, they had found something. Not a solution, but a possibility. A small chance that certain approaches might actually work. Given enough time and resources, the council met in emergency session. Solemnity and starlight spoke for many when he called humanity a philosophical contaminant. They were spreading false hope like a disease. They were convincing other species to abandon the peace that had taken so long to achieve. "We must quarantine human space," he declared. "No other species should be exposed to their delusion. They have chosen suffering over peace, and we cannot allow them to drag others down with them." The quarantine was established immediately. No ships were allowed in or out of human territory. No communications were permitted. Humanity and anyone who joined them would be isolated, left to face their eventual failure alone. But the quarantine came too late. Across the galaxy, younger members of dying species began asking questions. If humanity could find new approaches, what else might be possible? If the Varithi scientists found something worth investigating, what else had been dismissed too quickly? Seeds of doubt began to crack the foundation of universal acceptance. A small group of the peaceful Xanthi people, who had been preparing their final artworks, suddenly stopped and requested all the old scientific data. They wanted to review it themselves. Several other species did the same. Some even began their own desperate projects. Inspired by human defiance, the Council realized they were facing something unprecedented. For millions of years, they had carefully guided the galaxy toward peaceful acceptance. Now that careful work was unraveling. Species that had made peace with death were suddenly questioning everything. The infection of hope was spreading, and the Council didn't know how to stop it. In human space, beyond the quarantine, Chen Wei received daily reports of new species joining their cause. She knew that most of these projects would fail. She knew that the suffering would only grow worse. But when she closed her eyes at night, kept awake by the machines that sustained her aging body, she still felt something that she knew the Council had lost. She felt alive. 200,000 years had passed since humanity first refused to accept extinction. The universe had continued its slow decay, indifferent to the struggles of those who lived within it. Most of humanity's grand projects had failed. Project Prometheus had worked for 50,000 years before the quantum tunneling equipment finally broke down in ways that couldn't be repaired. The energy gained hadn't been worth the resources spent. Project Atlas had extended the useful life of dying stars, but eventually, even those carefully harvested photons ran out. Project Sisyphus never even came close to gathering enough mass for its artificial Big Bang. One by one, the defiant projects had fallen silent. The species that had joined humanity's cause had dwindled. Some had gone extinct despite their efforts. Others had returned to the Council, defeated and seeking the peace they had once abandoned. The Kraloth warriors who had joined humanity were now just stories. The Verithi scientists who had dared to hope again had long since faded away. The human population had dropped from trillions to billions, then to millions, and now barely reached 1 billion souls scattered across a handful of habitats. They clustered around an artificial star that they had built from the last resources they could gather. It was a beautiful construction, a testament to human engineering, that everyone knew it was temporary. In another few hundred years, even this final light would go dark. The Galactic Council, now consisting of only 3 remaining species, sent one last delegation. They came in a small ship, moving slowly through the darkness toward humanity's final bastion. They expected to find a broken civilization, ready at last to accept the peace that had eluded them for so long. The delegation was greeted by a woman named Sarah Okonkwo. She was the latest in a long line of ambassadors, descended from Chen Wei, where her ancestor had been augmented with crude machines. Sarah's body was almost entirely synthetic, a necessity in the low-resource environment of humanity's last days. "We've come to offer you peace," Solemnity and Starlight said. The ancient Verithi had survived all this time, kept alive by technologies even he didn't fully understand anymore. "You fought longer than any species in recorded history. You've earned the right to rest. Let us help you make your final years comfortable." Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the delegation uneasy. It wasn't the smile of someone defeated. It was the smile of someone who had a secret. "Thank you for the offer," she said, "but we're not quite finished yet." She led them through the habitats to a section that had been closed off to outside observation. Inside, they found something that made even the ancient Verithi pause in wonder. The room was filled with strange equipment, devices that seemed to bend space around themselves. Thousands of humans worked quietly, making adjustments and monitoring displays that showed information the delegation couldn't fully comprehend. At the center of it all was something that looked like empty space, but space that somehow seemed more real than the rest of the room. "This is Project Omega," Sarah explained. "We've been working on it for the last 150,000 years. Every other project was practice. This is what we've been building toward all along." She activated a holographic display that showed research from dozens of species, including some that the Council had thought were extinct. Humans, Kraloth, Varithi, Xanthi, and others had all contributed to this final effort. We discovered something that all of your species missed, Sarah continued. You were all looking for ways to preserve matter and energy. But we realized that consciousness doesn't need either of those things. It can exist as patterns in the quantum foam, the virtual particles that pop in and out of existence, even in perfect vacuum. Solemnity and Starlight's shimmer turned a color that indicated deep concern. You're talking about encoding minds into the fundamental fabric of reality. The math suggests it's theoretically possible, but it's never been done. Sarah interrupted. Until now, we've successfully uploaded 3 million volunteers into the quantum substrate. They exist now without bodies, without ships, without stars. They're woven into the universe itself. As long as quantum fluctuations exist, they'll exist. The delegation looked at each other in shock. If this was true, humanity had found a form of immortality that didn't depend on matter or energy. They had become something new, something that could potentially survive even the heat death of the universe. But Sarah wasn't finished. That's only part of Project Omega. The other species that joined us over the years, they contributed their own discoveries. Together, we found something even more significant. She pulled up another set of calculations. These ones so complex that even Solemnity and Starlight struggled to follow them. We've discovered a method to create a vacuum collapse. A true one, not the false vacuum decay that would destroy everything. This collapse would reset the physics in a localized bubble of space-time. New physical constants, new possibilities. Potentially, even a reversal of entropy in that region. One of the other delegates, a young Kraloth who had never known the warrior days of her people, spoke up in horror. That would destroy everything in the collapse radius. How large would this bubble be? About 1,000 light-years across, Sarah admitted. It would destroy every habitat we have left. Everyone still alive in the traditional sense would die. Solemnity and Starlight moved closer to Sarah, his entire body shimmering with distress. This is genocide. You would kill billions just to try an experiment that will probably fail. We've already voted, Sarah said quietly. Every species involved, every community, every individual who could make their voice heard. The vote was nearly unanimous. We'd rather die attempting the impossible than fade away knowing we gave up. She gestured to the equipment around them. Everyone here has already uploaded copies of themselves into the quantum substrate. Our bodies will die in the collapse, but our consciousnesses will survive, woven into whatever new physics emerges. If it works, if the new bubble creates conditions where entropy runs backward, we'll be there to see stars ignite instead of die. And if it doesn't work, the young Kraloth asked. Sarah's smile faded. Then we'll exist as patterns in the quantum foam, forever experiencing the nothing between moments. But even that's better than accepting extinction. The delegation tried to argue, tried to make humanity see reason. But it was clear that the decision had already been made. Solemnity and Starlight looked at Sarah with eyes that had seen more of the universe than any human would ever know. You understand that we must flee, he said. We cannot be part of this. We understand, Sarah replied. That's why we told you to come now. You have 3 days to get beyond the collapse radius. After that, we activate Project Omega. The delegation returned to their ship and fled into the darkness. Behind them, humanity and the last remnants of a dozen other species began their final preparations. As millions of humans uploaded themselves into the quantum substrate, Sarah Okonkwo stood in the control center and thought about Chen Wei, about the choice her ancestor had made so long ago. 3 days passed in silence. The Council's delegation fled through the darkness, their sensors trained backward toward human space. They were far beyond the predicted collapse radius, but Solemnity and Starlight insisted they go further still. He had lived long enough to know that when humans said something was impossible, they often found a way to make it happen anyway. Sarah Okonkwo stood in the control center, watching as the last humans completed their uploads. The process was peaceful. Each person lay down in a specialized chamber, and their consciousness was carefully encoded into the quantum foam. Within seconds, their bodies went still, but somewhere in the fabric of space itself, they continued to exist as pure information, pure thought. She had said goodbye to her daughter that morning. The girl was only 15, far too young to understand what was really happening. Sarah had held her as the upload began, felt her take one last breath, and then watched as the readings confirmed that her patterns now existed in the quantum substrate. Her body remained, but what made her who she was had been woven into reality itself. Now Sarah stood alone among the empty chambers. She was the last one. Someone had to monitor the systems until the very end to make sure that Project Omega activated correctly. It was an honor she hadn't asked for, but couldn't refuse. The control panel showed green lights across all systems. The vacuum collapse device was ready. The quantum substrate holding billions of uploaded consciousnesses was stable. Everything was perfect. Sarah activated the communication system one last time and sent a message toward the fleeing council ship. She knew they would receive it, though she also knew they wouldn't understand. Not really. How could they? They had spent millions of years learning how to die. Humanity had spent 200,000 years learning how to refuse. To anyone listening, she said, her voice calm despite everything. This is Sarah Okonkwo, final ambassador of humanity. In a few moments, we will activate Project Omega. We know you think we're insane. We know you believe we're throwing away our last chance for peace. Maybe you're right, but we've never been very good at accepting what others tell us is inevitable. She paused, looking around at the empty station. Our species has always been defined by our refusal to accept limits. When we were told we couldn't fly, we built machines that carried us into the sky. When we were told we couldn't leave our planet, we built ships that took us to the stars. And when we were told we couldn't survive the death of the universe, we decided to try anyway. Our hand moved toward the activation switch. We don't know if this will work. We don't know if we'll survive in any meaningful sense. But we know that we tried. And that has to count for something. She pressed the switch. For the first microsecond, nothing seemed to happen. Then reality began to tear. The vacuum collapse started at a single point and expanded outward at speeds that shouldn't have been possible. Space itself changed, its fundamental constants shifting as the collapse propagated through the region. Sarah felt her body disintegrate, but her mind remained clear. The upload process had worked for her too, and she experienced the collapse from the perspective of the quantum foam itself. She could feel the billions of other consciousnesses around her, human and otherwise, all of them woven into the fabric of a universe being reborn. The collapse continued for what felt like both an instant and an eternity. And then, in the center of the bubble, something new began to form. On the council ship, now millions of light years away, sensors detected the event. The readings were impossible. Where there had been dying stars and empty space, there was now something else entirely. A bubble of reality under different physical laws. What have they done? The young Kraloth whispered. Solemnity and Starlight studied the data with ancient eyes. They've created a pocket universe. A region where the laws of physics run differently, where entropy might decrease instead of increase. Over the following years, as the council ship continued its journey away from the collapse zone, they monitored the bubble carefully. What they saw defied everything they understood about reality. New stars formed inside the bubble. Not slowly, over millions of years, but rapidly, in mere centuries. These stars burned differently too, growing brighter and hotter as they aged instead of dimmer and cooler. Energy flowed backward, from chaos toward order, and there was something else. Strange patterns in the quantum foam, organized in ways that suggested intelligence. The consciousnesses that have been uploaded seem to have survived the collapse. They existed now as fundamental parts of this new reality, observers and participants in a universe where death itself might run backward. The Council debated for decades about what to do with this information. Some wanted to quarantine the bubble permanently, to prevent other species from learning what humanity had accomplished. Others argued that the knowledge should be shared, that every dying species deserved to know there might be another option. Eventually, they reached a compromise. The information would be added to the archives, available to anyone who asked, but not broadcast widely. Species that had made their peace with extinction would be allowed to maintain that peace. But those who still harbored doubt, still wondered if there might be another way, would be able to find what humanity had discovered. As the centuries passed, several more species chose to follow humanity's path. They built their own vacuum collapse devices, uploaded their consciousnesses, and created their own bubbles of reversed physics. The dying universe became dotted with small regions where stars brightened instead of dimmed, where the future held life instead of death. The Galactic Council grew smaller as the years rolled on. Some species chose the human way. Others continued to fade peacefully as they had always planned. Solemnity and Starlight lived long enough to see 50 different vacuum collapse events, 50 different refusals to accept extinction. Finally, as the last of the Verithi prepared for their own final rest, Solemnity and Starlight requested to visit the first bubble, the one humanity had created. He wanted to see it with his own eyes before the end. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the bubble. What Solemnity and Starlight saw took his breath away, though he had thought himself beyond surprise after so many millions of years. The bubble was beautiful. Thousands of young stars burned bright against the darkness. Planets had formed, and, according to their sensors, life had begun on several of them. Not the uploaded consciousnesses from the old universe, but new biological life evolved from simple chemicals into increasingly complex forms. They did it, he whispered. They actually created a new beginning. As his ship prepared to depart, a message came through on frequencies that shouldn't have existed. The quantum foam itself seemed to be speaking, carrying voices that echoed from the fabric of space. "We see you, old friend," the message said. It was impossible to tell if it was one voice or many, but Solemnity and Starlight recognized the tone. It was human, unmistakably so. We exist now in ways we never imagined. We are the stars we created. We are the space between them. We are the quantum fluctuations that might one day become new forms of life. Are you alive? Solemnity and Starlight asked. Are you conscious? We don't know, the voices replied, and he could hear something like laughter in them. We experience existence in ways that have no comparison to what we knew before. But we are here. We did not accept extinction. And now, in this small corner of a dying universe, we have created a place where life can begin again. The message paused, then continued. You should join us. All of you who remain. The method is proven now. You don't have to fade into nothing. You can become something new instead. Solemnity and Starlight considered this for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to shake his head. No, we made our choice long ago. We will see our path through to its end. But thank you for showing us that another way was possible. We understand, the voices said. But know this, in every bubble we create, in every pocket of reversed entropy, we remember all of you. The species that accepted their end with grace and dignity. You may have chosen peace, but you taught us that the choice itself was what mattered. Both paths have honor. The message faded, and Solemnity and Starlight ordered his ship to depart. He returned to what remained of the council and made his final report. The other Verithi listened carefully, and when he finished, they made a collective decision. They would add one final entry to the archives before they ended. A truth that had taken millions of years to understand. The entry read, "Humanity was the only species that refused to accept extinction." We do not know if they truly survived, or if they simply created a beautiful illusion to die within. But we know that where once there was only ending, they created beginning. Where once there was only darkness, they made light. They have shown us that acceptance and refusal are both valid responses to the inevitable. We chose our path. They chose theirs. And the universe is richer for having contained both choices. Millions of years later, long after the last of the council species had faded into peace, the bubbles remained. Small pockets of light in an ocean of darkness. And in each one, consciousness existed in forms beyond imagining, woven into the quantum substrate of realities that ran backward toward life instead of forward toward death. Humanity had refused extinction, and in refusing, they had become something eternal.